Welcome to our deep dive into nonviolent communication.
You can call it NVC.
NVC.
For short.
NVC. I like that. You shared Marshall Rosenberg's book with us.
Yeah.
So I know you're ready to kind of go
Beyond the basics.
beyond the basics here.
Right.
What's so fascinating about this deep dive is that it's not just about learning a new way to talk.
Yeah.
It's almost like
Totally.
rewiring your brain
It is.
to think differently
It's a whole different way of thinking.
about communication.
Absolutely. And that
together.
makes it so powerful. It's
Yeah.
not just learning some phrases.
Yeah.
It's about shifting our whole mindset.
Yeah, I like that.
Mm.
It seems like Rosenberg really wants us to ditch that old blame game style of communicating, where it's all about who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I'm a little skeptical.
Well,
Can we really change those deeply ingrained patterns?
Rosenberg's book makes a pretty compelling case. He calls that old-style, life-alienating communication. And he gives some pretty vivid examples of how it just damages relationships and blocks compassion. Think about those times you've heard someone say things like, "You always," or "you never."
Oh, totally.
Doesn't it instantly make you want to get defensive?
Yeah, it's like a wall goes up immediately.
Yes.
So how does NVC help us avoid that knee-jerk reaction?
Well, it all starts with understanding the 4 components of NVC.
Okay.
Observation, feelings, needs, and requests. They build on each other to create a framework for communicating with empathy and clarity.
Okay, I remember those from the book.
Right.
But what I'm really curious about is how they work together in practice.
Yeah.
Is there a specific order we need to follow?
You've hit on a key point there. It's not just about knowing the components.
Right.
It's about how we use them in real conversations.
Okay.
And yes, the order does matter.
So walk me through it.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm having a disagreement with someone. What's the first step?
The first step is observation. Rosenberg really stresses separating what we observe from our evaluations. Like in that example you mentioned earlier about someone being late, instead of saying, "You're always late," we stick to the facts.
Yeah.
I noticed you arrived at 8:30.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But honestly, sometimes it's hard to just state the facts without slipping in my own judgment,
It takes
especially in the heat of the moment.
practice. It definitely takes practice.
Any tips for staying purely observational?
One trick is to imagine you're a video camera,
Okay.
just recording what you see and hear. No commentary, just
Yeah.
pure observation.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So we've stated the facts. Now what?
Then comes expressing our feelings.
Okay.
And this is where it gets interesting because Rosenberg is very specific about what qualifies as a feeling.
Right. It has to be a genuine emotion, not a thought disguised as a feeling.
Yes.
I remember that example from the book, I feel misunderstood, isn't really a feeling.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
more of an interpretation. Instead, we'd need to dig deeper and identify the actual feeling behind that thought. Maybe it's frustration,
Right.
sadness, or loneliness.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this works. So we state the observation,
Yes.
then our genuine feeling. What's next?
This is where we get to the heart of NVC, connecting our feelings to our needs. We ask ourselves,
Yeah.
what need of mine is connected to this feeling?
So if I'm feeling frustrated because my partner didn't do the dishes, it's not really about the dishes.
Right.
It's about my need for order or fairness.
You got it.
Yeah.
And recognizing those underlying needs is essential because it helps us understand the why behind our emotions.
Yeah.
It also helps us connect to the other person on a deeper level.
This is starting to click for me. It's like we're going beyond just reacting to the surface behavior and digging deeper into the motivations behind it.
Exactly.
So-
And that deeper understanding is what paves the way for compassion, both for ourselves and for others.
So we've got the observation, the feeling, the need. What's the final piece of the puzzle?
It's the request. Once we've identified our needs,
Okay.
we can then make a clear, specific, and positive action request to help meet those needs.
So instead of complaining about what my partner didn't do, I could make a request like, would you be willing to help me tidy up the kitchen after dinner?
Precisely. You're shifting from blame and criticism to collaboration and understanding.
Okay.
You're also giving your partner a clear action they can take to make things better.
Okay. This is fascinating.
Yeah.
But honestly, it feels like a lot to keep track of in the middle of a conversation. Do we have to consciously go through all 4 steps every time?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
The beauty of NVC is that it's a flexible framework.
Okay.
You don't have to rigidly follow the steps in every interaction. The more we practice, the more naturally these principles will start to infuse our communication.
I can already see how this could be a game changer, especially when it comes to handling difficult emotions like anger.
Yeah.
Rosenberg seems to have a very different perspective on anger than what we usually hear.
Absolutely. He sees anger as a valuable signal, not something to be suppressed or avoided.
Okay.
And that's actually where he starts in the book. He tells this very personal story about getting hit in the nose by a child.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Wasn't it twice?
Yes, twice.
And the second time?
Yes.
He got really angry.
He was furious.
I'm curious to hear more about this and how it relates to NVC.
It's a powerful example of how our thoughts shape our experience of anger.
Okay.
And it sets the stage for understanding NVC's approach to transforming anger from a destructive force into a catalyst for positive change.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Let's dive deeper into this whole anger thing because I think a lot of us struggle with that.
I agree. Learning to understand and transform anger is one of the most valuable gifts NVC has to offer. And Rosenberg's story is a perfect starting point.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's talk about that story where Rosenberg gets hit in the nose. Not once, but twice.
Yeah, I remember thinking, ouch, that had to hurt. But what really struck me was how differently he reacted each time.
Right. The first time he was playing with a little girl, and he saw it as an accident. He wasn't angry at all. But the second time, he was working with a group of kids, and a boy hit him, seemingly out of nowhere. Rosenberg got furious.
It seems like a natural reaction. Someone hits you, you get angry.
Yeah.
But Rosenberg says that's not how it has to be.
Exactly. He argues that anger is not a direct result of the action itself, but rather our thoughts about the action. In that moment, all sorts of judgments flooded his mind. This kid is a bully. He's trying to disrespect me. He needs to be punished.
Yeah.
And it was those judgments, not the hit itself, that fueled his anger.
Wow, that's a really different way of looking at it.
Right.
So how do we apply this to our own lives?
Right.
Because let's be real, we all get angry sometimes.
Well, the key is to recognize that anger is a signal, not a sentence.
Okay.
It's telling us that some need of ours is not being met. Instead of lashing out or suppressing the anger, we can use those NVC steps we talked about earlier to decode what's really going on.
Okay, so let's say I'm in a situation where I'm feeling angry. What's the first thing I should do?
First, try to separate the observation from the evaluation. What actually happened? Just the facts, no added judgments.
So going back to that traffic example, someone cuts me off.
Yes.
The observation is simply, that car moved into my lane abruptly.
Perfect. No jerk, no idiot, just a neutral observation. Now, what are you feeling?
Oh, probably scared. Maybe a little bit frustrated that they almost hit me.
And what need of yours is connected to those feelings?
Safety, definitely. Maybe also a need for respect or consideration from other drivers.
You see, now you're getting to the heart of it. By identifying the unmet need, you're shifting from blaming the other driver to understanding yourself.
And that's where the power of NVC comes in. Because once I understand my own needs, I can start to think about how to meet them.
Right. It might not be possible to get that other driver to suddenly become more considerate.
Right.
But you can take steps to create a sense of safety for yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe that means taking a few deep breaths to calm down. Maybe it means adjusting your driving habits to be more aware of your surroundings.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could actually work.
Yeah.
It's like we're taking back control of our emotions instead of letting them control us.
Exactly. And the more we practice this, the more skilled we become at catching those judgments early on and reframing them in terms of needs.
Yeah.
It's not about denying the anger. It's about transforming it into something constructive.
You know, this reminds me of that story about the nurse and the dying husband.
Oh, yeah?
It seemed like she was using those same NVC principles.
Absolutely.
Even though she wasn't formally trained in it.
That story is a beautiful illustration of empathy in action.
Can we talk more about that? Because I think empathy is one of those things that people talk about a lot.
Right.
But it's not always clear what it actually means or how to do it effectively.
I agree. And I think NVC offers a really profound and practical approach to empathy. It's not about fixing, advising, or even agreeing with the other person. It's about connecting with them on the level of feelings and needs.
So in that story, the wife kept asking her husband how he felt about the cancer. But he just kept giving vague answers.
Yeah.
Most people would probably give up or try to offer solutions at that point.
Right. But the nurse didn't. She just kept listening, creating a space for him to express himself fully.
Yeah.
And she did this by focusing on his feelings and needs. Instead of asking, how are you feeling?
Right.
She'd say things like, are you scared? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Do you need some time alone?
It seems almost counterintuitive. You'd think that asking direct questions would be the most efficient way to understand someone.
But sometimes those direct questions can actually put people on the defensive.
Oh.
They might feel pressured to give a right answer.
Yeah.
Or they might not even be fully aware of what they're feeling.
So the nurse was using her questions to help him connect with those deeper emotions
Yeah.
that he might not have been able to articulate on his own.
Exactly. And by acknowledging his feelings and needs,
Yeah.
she was able to create a space of deep connection and understanding, which allowed him to finally open up and share what was truly in his heart.
That's so powerful.
Yeah.
It highlights how transformative empathy can be.
Yes.
Not just for the person receiving it,
Mm.
but also for the person giving it.
Yes.
It's like a bridge that connects us to each other's humanity.
Beautifully put. And, sometimes that bridge can be built with words, and sometimes it can be built with silence.
You mean just being present with someone even without saying anything?
Yes. Sometimes the most compassionate response is simply to hold space for someone in silence, allowing them to process their emotions without interruption.
It makes me wonder if we as a culture are a little too quick to fill the silence with words. We're so uncomfortable with those quiet moments.
I think that's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
We often feel this pressure to fix things, offer advice, or come up with the perfect response.
Right.
Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is simply our presence.
Yeah.
Our willingness to just be there with them in their pain or joy, without judgment or expectation.
Okay, so we've talked about self-empathy. We've talked about empathy for others.
Right.
Now I'm curious to see how all this comes together in the context of conflict resolution.
Yes.
Because honestly, that's where I struggle the most. I tend to either avoid conflict altogether,
Yeah.
or I get really defensive and things escalate quickly.
That's something a lot of people can relate to. But the good news is that NVC offers a really effective framework for navigating conflict in a way that's both assertive and compassionate.
Okay.
And it all starts with understanding that conflict is not about compromise.
Wait, what? Isn't compromise the whole point of resolving a conflict?
Right.
Meeting in the middle, finding a solution that everyone can live with?
Those are certainly common approaches.
Yeah.
But NVC takes a different stance. It's not about finding a middle ground. It's about finding a solution that fully meets everyone's needs.
I'm not sure I understand. How is that even possible?
Right.
Especially when people have opposing needs or wants.
Well, that's where the magic of NVC comes in.
Okay.
It's not about pitting needs against each other.
Yep.
It's about understanding the deeper motivations behind those needs. And often when we dig a little deeper, we find that what seem like opposing needs are actually different expressions of a shared human need.
Okay, I need an example here. This sounds a bit too idealistic for me.
Well, think about that story in the book about the couple who had been fighting about money for 39 years.
Oh, yeah. The one where they finally resolved it using NVC?
Right.
I'd admit I was skeptical about that one. 39 years is a long time to be stuck in a conflict.
It is, but it just shows how powerful this approach can be. For years, they had been arguing about how to spend and save their money. The wife wanted more autonomy. The husband wanted more security.
Okay.
It seemed like an unresolvable impasse.
So how did they finally break through that gridlock?
By shifting from arguing about their positions to understanding each other's needs.
Okay.
The wife realized that her need for autonomy wasn't about spending recklessly. It was about having a voice in financial decisions and feeling trusted to manage her own money. The husband realized that his need for security wasn't about controlling his wife.
Okay.
It was about knowing that they had enough money to meet their basic needs and feel safe and stable.
Okay, so they uncovered these deeper needs, but how did that actually translate into a solution?
By working together to find a system that met both of their needs.
Okay.
They decided to create separate accounts for their individual spending, which gave the wife the autonomy she craved.
Uh-huh.
But they also agreed to contribute a set amount each month to a joint account for shared expenses and long-term savings,
Right.
which gave the husband the security he needed.
I'm starting to see how this works. It's about getting creative and collaborative rather than competitive.
Exactly.
But I have to admit, it still seems pretty challenging to put this into practice, especially when emotions are running high.
It is, NVC is a practice, not a perfection. But the more we use it, the more skilled we become at navigating conflict in a way that strengthens relationships rather than tearing them apart.
Yeah.
And remember, those 4 components are always there to guide us.
Right, the observation, feeling, need, and request. But how do we apply those steps when we're in the middle of an argument? It seems like things would just escalate even further if we start analyzing our feelings and needs in the heat of the moment.
That's a really important point. And that's where the skill of empathy comes in. Before we can even begin to talk about our own needs, we need to make sure the other person feels heard and understood.
Okay, so we're back to empathy again. But how do we do that effectively when someone is angry or upset? I feel like anything I say just makes things worse.
Well, that's where Rosenberg's advice about paraphrasing can be really helpful.
Yeah.
It shows the other person that we're genuinely trying to understand their perspective.
Okay.
And it helps us avoid making assumptions or jumping to conclusions.
So instead of just saying, I understand,
Right.
I would try to reflect back what I'm hearing, both in terms of their observations and their feelings.
Exactly. And you can even take it a step further by reflecting back their needs.
Okay.
Even if they haven't explicitly stated them.
Uh-huh.
So, for example, you might say something like, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated because you need to feel respected and listened to.
That's a good point. I think sometimes we assume we know what the other person is thinking or feeling.
Yes.
But we're often way off base. Paraphrasing forces us to slow down and really listen.
And that's when the real magic of empathy happens.
Yeah.
Because when people feel truly heard and understood,
Right.
it often de-escalates the situation and creates space for a more constructive dialogue.
Okay, this is all making sense, but I'm curious to hear more about how we apply those NVC steps to ourselves in the midst of a conflict. Because sometimes I'm my own worst enemy.
Right.
I get defensive.
Right.
I shut down. I say things I regret later. How do we use NVC to manage our own internal reactions?
That's where self-compassion becomes crucial. And it's often the most challenging part of NVC because we tend to be much harder on ourselves than we are on anyone else.
Oh, tell me about it. My inner critic can be brutal.
But NVC reminds us that we deserve the same kindness and understanding that we offer to others.
Right.
And that includes recognizing and meeting our own needs, even in the midst of a conflict.
So how do we do that? It's not like we could just take a time out in the middle of an argument and have a heart-to-heart with ourselves.
Well, it might not always be possible to take a full time out, but we can still use those NVC steps internally to help us regulate our emotions and stay grounded in the conversation.
So if I notice myself getting defensive, I could pause for a moment and ask myself, what am I feeling right now?
Yeah,
And what need of mine is not being met?
exactly. It's like hitting the pause button on the autopilot reaction and giving yourself a chance to reconnect with your own inner wisdom.
And then I could use that information to frame a request,
Yes.
either to myself or to the other person.
Right. So, for example, if you notice you're feeling overwhelmed,
Yeah.
you might say to yourself, I need to take a few deep breaths and calm down before I continue this conversation.
Right.
Or you might say to the other person, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed right now. Would it be okay if we took a break and came back to this later?
I can see how that would be so much more effective than just lashing out or shutting down completely.
And it also models healthy communication for the other person.
Right.
You're showing them that it's okay to take care of your own needs, and you're inviting them to do the same.
This is all so insightful. I'm really starting to see the transformative potential of NVC, not just for resolving conflicts, but for improving all our relationships.
Absolutely. And it's not just about external relationships.
Right.
NVC can also have a profound impact on our relationship with ourselves.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this.
Well, that's where self-compassion and self-forgiveness come in. Rosenberg argues that we can apply those same NVC principles to our own inner critic, transforming self-judgment into self-understanding and self-acceptance.
This is really resonating with me. I think a lot of us struggle with that inner voice of self-criticism.
We do, and it can be so destructive. But NVC offers a way to turn that inner critic into an inner ally.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that we all make mistakes and that those mistakes are not a reflection of our worthiness,
Yeah.
but rather opportunities for learning and growth.
Easier said than done, right?
Yeah,
I know I have a tendency to beat myself up when I mess up.
that's a common reaction. But Rosenberg encourages us to treat ourselves with the same compassion and understanding that we would offer to a dear friend.
Okay.
He even tells this funny story about himself in a polka dot suit.
Oh, yes. The one where he accidentally ruined his new suit. I have to admit, I chuckled when I read that.
It's a great example of how he used NVC to transform self-judgment into self-compassion.
I'm eager to hear more about this.
Yeah.
Tell me the story. So Rosenberg had just bought this new light gray suit to wear for an important workshop.
Uh-huh.
New suit, fancy event? I can already see where this is going.
Right. And he's rushing out the door at the end of the workshop with a pen in his pocket.
Uh-oh. Uncapped pen.
You guessed it. And it ends up leaking all over his brand new suit, leaving these big blue polka dots everywhere. His initial reaction was anger and self-judgment. He thought, how could I be so stupid?
I can relate to that feeling. I'd probably be mortified.
But then he stopped and asked himself, what need was I trying to meet when I put that pen in my pocket?
Okay. So he's using those NVC steps.
Yeah,
Even in a moment of self-criticism.
exactly. And he realized he was trying to meet his need to be helpful and responsive to the participants.
Hmm.
He had been so focused on being there for them that he hadn't even thought about the pin.
So instead of blaming himself, he was able to see his actions through a lens of compassion and understanding. But did that really make him feel better about the ruined suit?
Well, it didn't magically fix the suit,
Right.
but it did shift his perspective.
Right.
He was able to move from self-blame to self-acceptance, which allowed him to see the humor in the situation and learn from the experience. He realized that he could meet his need to be helpful in other ways,
Okay.
like taking a few extra moments to make sure the pen was capped.
Okay, that's a great example. It shows how we can apply those NVC principles to ourselves even when we make mistakes.
Yes.
But I'm also curious to hear more about how we can use NVC to express appreciation, because that seems like a tricky area too. It's easy for compliments to come across as insincere or manipulative.
That's a really important point. And that's why NVC has a specific approach to expressing appreciation that sets it apart from conventional compliments.
So it's not just about saying, good job, or you look nice.
Right. In NVC, we express appreciation to celebrate, not to manipulate.
Okay, so what's the difference? How do we do that?
It's about focusing on the specific actions or qualities that we appreciate and then connecting those actions or qualities to the needs that they meet for us.
So instead of just saying, great presentation, I might say something like, I really appreciated how clearly you explained those complex concepts. It helped me understand the material much better,
Exactly.
which is something I really value.
You're acknowledging the specific action you appreciate, and you're connecting it to the need that it met for you, in this case, the need for understanding.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It feels much more genuine and heartfelt than a generic compliment.
Yeah.
But honestly, it feels a bit awkward and wordy.
Mhm.
Do we really have to spell it all out like that?
It can feel a bit unnatural at first, especially if we're not used to expressing appreciation in this way. But the more we practice, the more naturally it will flow. And remember, it's not about following a script.
Right.
It's about connecting with the other person from a place of genuine gratitude.
You know, this reminds me of that story about the game at Rosenberg's party where he asked people to share what appreciation would make them jump for joy.
Oh, that's a great one.
Hmm.
And it really highlights the power of authentic appreciation. It wasn't about flattery or empty compliments. It was about going deep and expressing what truly mattered to people.
And the responses were so heartfelt, weren't they? Some people even started crying.
They did. It just shows how deeply we all crave to be seen and appreciated for who we are, for the gifts we bring to the world.
Yeah. And it also reveals how often that need goes unmet.
Especially in a culture that tends to focus on criticism and judgment. We're much quicker to point out what's wrong than to acknowledge what's right.
That's true.
Right.
But NVC offers us a way to shift that balance, to create a culture of appreciation, where we celebrate each other's contributions and acknowledge the beauty in our shared humanity.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
NVC is about so much more than just learning a new way to talk. It's about creating a more compassionate and connected world.
Yes.
But I have to admit, it still feels a bit daunting. It's like learning a whole new language.
It is a new language in a way, but it's a language that speaks to our hearts.
Yeah.
A language that has the power to transform our relationships and our lives.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I've only just scratched the surface of NVC.
And that's the beauty of it. There's always more to discover, more to practice, more to integrate into our daily lives.
Well, I'm definitely hooked. I can't wait to keep exploring and experimenting with NVC. That's fantastic. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. Be patient with yourself, have fun with it, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's where the real learning happens.
This has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights with us.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listener, I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to take your NVC journey even further.
Absolutely. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, remember that's perfectly normal. Start small, focus on one principle at a time, and celebrate your progress along the way.
And if you find yourself struggling, don't give up. There are so many resources available to support you on this path. Books, workshops, online communities. You don't have to do this alone.
That's such an important point. Connecting with others who are also learning and practicing NVC can be so helpful and inspiring. We can learn from each other's experiences and support each other on the journey.
Exactly. And remember, the more we practice NVC, the more we contribute to creating a world where communication is a force for connection, compassion, and peace.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, may your words be kind, your heart be open, and your connections be deep.